My family and I went to Australia in 2020, right before COVID hit. When we were in Australia, it was January, and my mom sent a message, an email saying, I'm really worried. There's this virus in China. And I thought, oh, Mom, China's so far away from Australia. What are you worried about? And I'm so grateful we had that trip before everything shut down, in addition to being an incredible place.
So favorite trip, next favorite child, I guess?
No, that changes on a daily basis. So
Welcome. This is Uncommon Sense, a CPA podcast presented by the Heshi CPA Knowledge Center. The center is an initiative of the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the Chartered Professional Accountant profession in Alberta. For the record, this CPA podcast isn't about bean counting. Our episodes feature conversations with Alberta CPAs sharing their insights on a wide range of timely topics.
I'm Erin Schwartz, Director of the CPA Education Foundation, and this episode is part 2 of my conversation with CPA Nikki Marchiel. In part 1, Nikki talked about her career path and her experiences and perspectives related to her role as an educator. We also got around to talking about financial literacy, what that term means, and how we can help young people develop their skills in this area. In this episode, Nikki and I continue our conversation about financial literacy, and she shares more insights into the value and importance of being financially literate. From the pros and cons of credit cards to our feelings about money, there's all that and more in this episode. Let me briefly reintroduce Nikki for those who haven't heard part 1. Nikki is a CPA who began her career in a more traditional accounting role with a large company. She later began teaching accounting and continues to do so, teaching at NAIT in Edmonton and elsewhere. She also develops curriculum for the CPA Professional Education Program and works for CPA Alberta in the Practical Experience Group. One of Nikki's biggest interests, both professionally and personally, is financial literacy, and it's on that topic where we will resume our conversation. By the way, if you haven't yet listened to part 1 of my discussion with Nikki, I think you will enjoy it, so please check it out. Welcome, Nikki, and thanks for coming back for part 2.
thanks, Erin. It's great to be back.
So what have you been doing lately with your kids? You said 16 and 14. So with the understanding that, of course, they've had a lot of financial literacy education, right, from a very young age. But what does that look like these days in your household?
So things have changed a lot because as the kids have gotten older, it's normal to change some strategies, some teaching. But also I've stated this before, I've made a lot of mistakes. Again, trying to teach, trying to explain something and it doesn't quite land. So now that they're getting older, they have more autonomy over their finances. So our kids get an allowance and to earn that allowance, they have work, daily and weekly chores that they have to do.
Yeah.
When they do that, they get their allowance. They have to cover their cell phone bill. They have to invest $25 a month. And they get to spend the rest of the money as they see fit. But that needs to last them until the end of the month, or they can choose if they want to save up for something.
Right.
They get to make those decisions. Of course, we talk about it, but we're not telling them what to do. Because I feel that with any skill, it needs to be practiced. You don't just leave home and you're magically good at managing your finances.
Yeah.
I know as much as we talked about financial literacy in my house, we never talked about credit cards. I didn't know how credit cards worked. Right. And I know that sounds so silly to say, but it's true. And so I got my first credit card and wow, it's really easy to spend $3,000 when you're young.
Yeah.
Just in an instant, it's at $3,000. And then the thought of paying that back, and I didn't understand the interest charges. So again, coming back to this idea, what we're doing now is trying to get our kids to understand the idea of paying yourself first, because that's a strategy that works for us as adults, to automate savings. So it just goes right away. We don't see it. That goes into an investment account. And so that's the idea that they're doing. So it becomes automatic. I know that a portion of my earnings every month gets put away.
Yeah.
And if it starts now, it will continue on, we hope, because it's just a normal activity.
Yeah.
So we're doing that. And then again, that idea of autonomy so that they can make mistakes now.
Yes.
This is the time to fail.
Yeah.
Fail away.
You've got a safety net. These aren't big, huge decisions where you're losing hundreds of $1,000s on a house situation or that kind of thing. It's, Mom, you know what? I went out to eat too much with my friends this week, and now I'm out of cash and I really want to go to the movies. I don't know what your kids are into. But, it's like that. It's lower stakes and it's, safety net, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And just understanding my daughter loves Starbucks. Okay, what's the cost of a Starbucks? How many Starbucks can you buy in a month with the money that you have? And the other idea is, of course, cost control, managing your costs, but this idea that there's no ceiling on how much you can make. Well, there is a ceiling when you're 16 and 14. But it's the idea that if you want, well, we always say in our house, don't wish for it, work for it. You want something. My daughter loves Apple products. She owns, I don't own basically any Apple products other than my phone and my AirPods. She has almost all of them bought with her own money.
Right.
So she's worked, she's saved. It's this idea that if you want something, there's a way to get it. And you have to maybe creatively think, how can I make that money? What can I do?
And also, what am I foregoing? Right? If you want to have a Starbucks every day, that's totally fine. Just know that that's however many dollars spent in a month, and you maybe would like to do something different with that money, right? So probably those times she was saving up for, I don't know, the newest iPad or something was months that she wasn't going out for coffee so much or what have you, right? It's, again, that concept of trade-off. I can do this or that.
And so now she is making, you can find all kinds of recipes online to make the copycat version at home using mom and dad's groceries. It's a smart hack.
I was going to say that's a nice little loophole in the system, hey?
Right? I was impressed by that.
Very. That's great. So when would you say that you started this kind of system where it was you get money for chores, a certain amount has to go into savings, investing, and then you can kind of choose what to do?
It's hard to remember exactly when we started, but I do remember we were in Vancouver for a wedding. And so I remember my son was 3 and my daughter would have been 5. And we were walking past, there was a building downtown Vancouver. It was the Fortis building. And I said to the kids, you own a piece of this company. And they're looking at this big building and they said, well, what piece do we own? And I said, well, it's this idea of stocks. And I said, it's a really hard idea, but we could just envision if this building represented the whole company, you guys might own this brick.
Right.
This is how small.
Making it tangible, right? Conceptual to real.
Trying to make it tangible. At that point, they weren't earning an allowance, but I will tell you, I bet it was the next year that my kids, simple jobs.
Yeah.
They have to do the dishes every night.
Empty the dishwasher.
Laundry,
those types of things.
Yeah. Well, not so much my son with the laundry. My daughter's been doing hers for years.
I can relate.
And then they have their weekly cleaning, but just making age-appropriate chores. Yeah. I did read as well just recently that there are positive outcomes to kids who have to do chores because it's good for their self-esteem. Mm-hmm. And it's just life skills as well. As I've said, we don't have a house cleaner, so you need to learn how to cook and clean and take care of yourself because you're probably not going to be able to do those things or pay for those things. You're going to need to do those for yourself. Mm-hmm. So I would say we started the allowance, probably 6 and 4.
Wow.
Was that idea. And we used to, at that time, we would have different jars. We went to the dollar store. We got some fun jars. And so it was cash. that we would pay them physical cash.
They could see it.
Could see it, and we could put some in the different jars. We actually had a donation jar as well, so they would love the Humane Society in our house. So there was some put away for the Humane Society.
So they would have a jar like for each bucket, jar, whatever, right? Like, so it was like, okay, this is money you're saving. This is money you can spend on something fun. This is money you're donating, like that kind of thing.
Yes.
And then they could kind of see how the split works and go from there.
That's right. That's right.
Very cool.
And now, physical cash, our kids don't really, well, they use it a little bit. Now it's just electronic deposits.
Yeah.
And they have their own bank card. Yeah. So they can, again, have that autonomy. We still can see all of their transactions.
Yeah.
So things evolve.
But that's because they understand it, right? They're not the like, oh, I have this piece of plastic and then you rack up $3,000 on a credit card, right? Like because they have that foundation of seeing the cash and understanding how that all works.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the investing, that part came in later. So I would say that's probably been 5 or so years where we have taken a specific portion monthly and put it into investment. Prior to that, what we would do is with their birthday and Christmas money, we would say, okay, you've got money from the grandparents or family members. Yeah. Let's take a portion of this and put it into investments.
Yeah.
I also remember when my daughter was 6, Frozen was the rage, the movie Frozen. And she had wanted this frozen cake, and it had this cake topper that she was just dying for. It was $50 from the Disney store. Oh. And I said, at that time, I think a Disney share was $100. And I said, if you don't get that Disney topper, instead, I will buy you 1 share in Disney. And I said, so that means that you don't get that topper, but instead, hopefully, this money will grow, but you don't get the topper. And I said, I also want you to think you'd have that topper for 1 day. What are you going to do with it afterwards?
Yeah.
Because that just, even now, like that's a lot of money for one little plastic piece.
Yeah.
And then I said, look at Disney. All of your friends love Disney. So when you buy a piece of the company and all of these people like this company, that means that in theory, the company should make money off your friends and off all these other people who love Disney. And you own a little piece of that so you can go along for the ride. And hopefully, now Disney stock has not always done the greatest since then, but that's okay. It doesn't always work that way. Yes. So that was part of the other thing that we did early on was stock picking. We don't do that necessarily as much anymore. Okay. Part of that is my own financial literacy education has changed as well. So this idea of a simple way to invest is ETFs. They're great. Exchange traded funds. Index funds are great. But to make it more tangible for kids, what we would do is either with their birthday, Christmas money, and we would always say, we'll give you X dollars on your birthday. We'll buy stocks for you. But you have to give us a list of 3 or 5 companies. And then why do you think that this is a good stock to buy? So again, maybe not the greatest education in terms of stock picking, because I don't necessarily think that's great. You're putting all of your eggs into that one basket. But to get kids thinking about it and excited for that benefit alone, I think that I'm happy with the way that it went that way.
Right.
And that's where when my son was in grade 2 and he had his Netflix stocks, because they all know what Netflix is.
Yes.
They know what Apple is. And so, looking around at products or services. Lots of times it's at the dinner table and the kids are saying, like, are the Edmonton Oilers, can I buy a piece of the Edmonton Oilers?
Right.
Well, that's not a publicly traded company.
Yeah.
So lots of times at our dinner table, I don't always know what's publicly traded or not, but we have a Google, what is the
Google
Nest,
Home or Nest or whatever.
Where you talk to it. There's a lot of times where we're like, hey, Google, what, is this company?
Yeah.
We're just driving.
Can we?
Yeah.
Can we buy stocks in this company?
We were driving past Chick-fil-A on Sunday, and I said, it's closed on Sunday. And so my son says, is that a publicly traded company? And I said, guarantee not, because if it was publicly traded, it would be open on Sunday. Yeah. But let's find out.
Yeah.
it's family owned. So there you go.
Yeah.
But it's just, again, seeing these products and services and then making that connection.
Right.
Oh, okay, maybe I can invest in this. And again, it's just the whole idea of thinking about investing.
Yeah.
They will refine their processes and get better
Totally.
later. But for now, it's just getting them thinking about it, interested in it, and learning.
Yeah. Very cool. Your kids obviously are very interested in like learning about financial literacy. And I think that's a lot of that is probably that foundation that you built. But in terms of kind of some of your other work with your kids' friends, with junior achievement and, you know, in the other spaces where you've been teaching financial literacy, do you find it's hard to engage youth in it? Are they interested? Does it just go right over their head? Is it boring?
Not at all. Oh my goodness. When I have done sessions, so CPA Canada has some great financial literacy programs. If there is anybody who is either a teacher, that's the thinking about kids, but there's programs for all different groups.
Right.
It's a free service where volunteers will either physically come in or do it virtually. And in my experience, there's not enough time for all of the questions and the interest. When you're talking with little kids, sometimes it's harder to keep them on track. But it's amazing to me when I go into a school, grade 3 and 4,
Really?
and you're yes, it
Amazing.
is. It is amazing. There's a whole variety of knowledge. Some kids say, yeah, my parents are saving. They don't know it's an RESP, but they say, yeah, my parents have some money for my education.
Right.
Or others are saying, yeah, I have a savings account. So those are interesting. All the way up to, I did junior high in October. And that's when Bitcoin was really going through a rally. Oh my goodness. All they wanted to ask was crypto, Bitcoin. But you know what? It doesn't matter what it is. It's having that conversation and having kids be curious about it, because then you can talk to them and to say, let's talk about Bitcoin. Let's talk about the pros and the cons, the risks and rewards, and everything about it. But you have to get them to start talking about it first.
Right.
Also, I found teaching at NATE, those times that we were able to talk about financial literacy, that's when people were interested. Far more than talking about accounting. So I love to bring in real life examples because that's how I learn.
Yeah.
And I have no shame in talking about the mistakes I've made. And you want to hear people, or you want to see people become interested, start talking about the mistakes you've made.
Right.
They're fascinated.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because a lot of people don't talk about mistakes.
Right.
Or if they just want to learn, maybe how can I avoid it? I'm not really sure the reason.
I think it's inherently more dramatic too, right? Like it's the story aspect of it. I think it's probably a lot of different factors, but
I like that, Erin. I think that's I think you've hit something
piece of
there.
it.
Yeah. Anytime that you're able to talk about those things, I think there is interest because, again, coming back to that discussion that money is a common denominator. It cuts through all occupations, all facets of life, and therefore you can't ignore it.
Yeah. It's kind of taking a step away from financial literacy and more into the accounting world. It's that concept of, as a CPA, you and I can work anywhere, right? Like accounting is accounting, but like, what are you passionate about? And because every business out there needs money management in some way, shape, or form, right? Yeah. So that's where you can kind of, if you want, you can get more specialized and more niche into, the area that you're passionate about, which is really cool. But then on that personal level, it's financial literacy is the same thing.
Yes. And so coming back to these CPA Canada financial literacy sessions, there's several that I've mentioned, the ones for kids, but I've also delivered sessions for entrepreneurs because you're right. If you're an entrepreneur, you have to know the numbers.
Yeah.
Unless you have somebody else who can do it for you. but having at least some of that knowledge, the basics. So those have been great sessions to do. I've also done sessions for newcomers to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Again, one of the 7 social determinants of health is having financial literacy. It's critical to being successful moving from another country here is to even understand our banking system, which might be very different from where somebody comes from. And I know that from talking to international students at NAIT, from doing these financial literacy sessions where I've had a newcomer that said, I moved here, I went to the bank, I thought I had to sign up for a credit card. I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Thought it was needed.
Yeah.
Again, it's critical. It doesn't matter what walk of life that you come from, what you do, to have that basic understanding at a minimum.
Yeah, for sure. So we've talked a lot about kind of what you've done with your kids and all of that. So do you have any tips for parents who are hoping to raise their children's knowledge of financial literacy? Obviously, I think we can all take lots of good ideas from your experiences and stuff, but like what would be the basic tips you would give?
First of all, you don't need to be an expert. I am not an expert in financial literacy.
Right.
I've read books.
Yeah.
I'm interested. I'm not an expert.
Right.
I'll repeat it one more time. I've made lots of mistakes. Mistakes are okay. I think sometimes people, parents, everyone might be afraid because they don't want to make a mistake.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. Absolutely. So I think recognize you don't need to be an expert and talk to your kids. Have the conversation. Make it normal to talk about money. There is a statistic, and I can't remember where it came from, but it said, particularly when it comes to women and talking about how much money that they make, their income, that women in particular shy away completely. They don't want to talk about money. So money can have a lot of feelings of shame, and some parents just don't feel comfortable. They don't want to talk to their kids, maybe because they don't know how, maybe because they feel they don't have the knowledge, or maybe because in their house, they didn't talk about it.
Right.
But for example, in my house, we didn't really talk about feelings because my house was typical with everybody else at that time, or the majority of families. We didn't talk about those kind of things. We did talk about financial literacy. We were a little unique in that way.
Yeah.
But I think being willing to have those conversations with kids is one of the biggest things that I would recommend. And I love that idea that you talked about the trade-offs.
Yeah.
So just making it part of everyday conversation. It doesn't have to be this formal thing where you sit down and it's like, well, kids, now we're going to talk about financial literacy. But it's instead just weaving it in and allowing your kids to be curious and to ask you questions.
Because like we said, it's embedded everywhere, right? So you can't go a day without it. So it presumably would be reasonable and doable to just sprinkle it in throughout various experiences and milestones and learnings and all of that, right? Because it is kind of part of everything.
It is. And if you're having those conversations with your kids and you don't know the answer, there's lots of great resources out there. And there's one in particular I wanted to shout out because I use it all the time.
Yeah.
It's the OSC, the Ontario Security Commission. So it's a reputable site. It's called Get Smarter About Money.
Okay.
And in particular, I love the calculators. So I know that's probably not a surprise that as a CPA I would love these online calculators, but they're so cool because you can put in things like a compound interest calculator. So you can show your kids the power of the time value of money and compound interest. If you invest and save this much at an average rate of return, this is how much that you can have. So we did that with my daughter when she was saving for her first vehicle. There's all kinds of retirement calculators, education. So if you want to, for kids, when I am in schools, junior and high school, they're starting to ask about education.
Post-secondary.
Yeah. Costs, the scholarships, all of these kinds of things. So lots of great resources, again, that you can go. The library, I've mentioned that.
Yeah.
Books. there's some good resources out there. It doesn't have to take a lot of time either. I think you can find some good resources or send your kid to the resources too. You just have to be careful with what is out there and finding the reputable sources versus the crypto bros on TikTok that may not have the best information.
But I bet they're catchy and, it maybe appeals to the kids. So yeah, being on top of that for sure to make sure you're not just resourced, but responsibly resourced maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But cool to look at, okay, what areas are of interest to them. And again, meeting them where they're at, whether that's in the age appropriate way, but also in the like, okay, you seem really curious about this side of things. So let's go more on that. And if I don't know, that's okay. I don't need to have all the answers. Let's discover it together. Let's learn together. And, that's, I think, an important piece of parenthood, parent-child relationships anyway, right? Whether it's financial literacy or anything else. So that's fantastic. Thank you.
That's one of the things about being a CPA. I always say to my PEP candidates, you don't have to have all the answers because I don't have all the answers, but I know how to research really well because those are skills you learn in the CPA program is how to research and find credible sources.
Yeah. So if you were talking today with a post-secondary student, would you recommend the CPA career path to them and why or why not?
Of course. And this is something I've been asked multiple times teaching at NATE.
Yeah.
In fact, I was like, is there a points-based system or commission for converting a general business admin student to the accounting stream? I'm just kidding, kind of.
Recruitment team, get on that.
Look, I never thought I would be an accountant. I didn't want to be an accountant. I thought all accountants were detail-oriented, incredible at math, and I'm not good at either of those. So I came to my CPA late, but I recommend a CPA designation because it'll open up doors and paths that you probably didn't know existed or you didn't think of. And I will often tell students about my own experience that I am now in a career, which is, I've really kind of worked myself into accounting education, and I absolutely love it. I never in a million years would have thought that this is where I would end up. But I've ended up here because I have my designation. I wouldn't have ended up here otherwise.
Right.
So I think anyone who has an interest in numbers, which does not mean that you need to be great at math.
Because guess what? Calculators and computers can do math.
Yes. And my son in grade 8, that math, in my opinion, is way harder. I am not joking. Than what we do on, for my experience, that's much harder. So if you have a remote interest in numbers, and if you like solving problems, I think those are two good indicators that a CPA might be a good fit for you.
Yeah.
The other reason that I would recommend a CPA is I often say that the CPA walks in the door before I do. So what I mean by that is it's almost like instant credibility. Now, that's not to say I still have to do all the work.
Yeah.
I still have to show up, still have to run the marathon, but it does give some credibility because it signals that you've done the work, you've gone through a rigorous training program. You've been independently evaluated from an education and a practical experience perspective. And so just the fact that I have that, I'm so proud to have my CPA designation, something I never thought I wanted.
Yeah.
In fact, I fought very hard against my dad for many years. I think he just wore me down, but that's okay. It does. It opens up all of those doors.
Yeah.
To things that you might not have thought of before. And it's not only the doors that it opens, the additional income compared to an undesignated professional. But I love the fact that it trained my brain to think in a way that it didn't before I took my training. So just being objective, just being able to critically think about scenarios.
Anything, whether it's numbers or other things, the problem-solving piece, right?
The problem solving.
Yeah.
That is the benefit that keeps going. It doesn't matter what work that I'm doing. It fundamentally changed my brain in the best possible way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that problem solving and then the ability to make the story out of the numbers or what have you, right? Out of the analysis. And I think that comes through in a lot of you sharing the discussions with the kids and stuff like that, is that like that storytelling piece, that conclusion, that, you know, the meaning behind things and all of that, I think really comes through. Yeah. Thanks for that, Nikki, and thank you for being such a wonderful guest on these 2 episodes. Your insights into financial literacy are thoughtful and well-informed. Despite you not being an expert, as you say, you're very clearly very passionate about it, and we really appreciate that. You've given our listeners a lot to think about, and myself as well. Thanks as well for sharing with us your perspectives and experiences regarding teaching and the accounting profession, and best wishes for continued success in your very unconventional career.
Thanks, Erin.
The Uncommon Sense podcast is presented by the CPA Education Foundation and funded by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center was created through a generous donation to the CPA Education Foundation by the late Brian Heshe. Brian was a distinguished Albertan, business leader, CPA, educator, and community builder. His generosity and commitment to education underpinned his good works across Alberta throughout his lifetime. We would like to acknowledge that the CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and Métis Nation homeland. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous people and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Technical and recording services for this podcast provided by Wolf Willow Studios in Edmonton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. If you have any comments on the podcast, write to us at cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. To learn more about the CPA Education Foundation and the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center, visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation. Thanks for listening.